And tonight's guest is Robert Sims Reed. Welcome.
Thank
Can I
you.
call you Bob?
Yes, please.
Okay. Welcome, Bob. And Bob is another one of the many illustrious authors we have in the Missoula area, and an author of detective fiction. I don't know if some authors don't like to be pegged in a genre. How do you feel about that?
I don't mind. It felt a little odd at first, being a square peg and not sure if it's a square hole or not, but that's okay, sure. Okay. That's what it is.
Well, with that in mind anyway, I also like to just let our viewers know that you are also a detective yourself for the Missoula City Police Department?
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, and that's your vocation, and
yeah. If I hadn't gone to do that sort of work, I don't know if I would ever have written those kinds of books. So.
Okay, so that's what I want to talk about first a little bit.
Okay.
Is how there's an obvious sort of relationship or symbiosis between the work you do and what you write about. I wonder, how does that all fit together? How does your work inspire your writing?
Well, in more of a generic than a specific way. I don't write specifically about the kinds of things that I do at work. I don't rely on actual cases or anything like that. But as far as the work habits and the methods and the attitudes, that's pretty close, and that comes from work. I should say too, the characters don't come from work.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah.
Some of them are a little seedy in there.
Yeah.
They're great characters.
Well, every now and then somebody will say, now I figured out who this character is and who this character is. And so far, it's always been a different person, so I seem to be not making them too close to real people.
So, is it a safe assumption to say that your day-to-day work is a lot less exciting than what you write about? I mean, a lot of
quite a bit, yeah. Oh, yeah. Lots of time at, well, in the old days, the typewriter, today the computer. Lots of time on the telephone. Lots of time just driving. And very, very few thrills and chills. So.
Right. Well, I must admit I've only read one of your books, and that was Cupid.
Yeah.
And the detective in there, the protagonist's name is Leo Banks, and I need to ask you, as I read other books, am I going to find him again, or do you have a different person involved each time?
I basically have two sets of characters. There's the Leo Banks character, who's a first-person narrator and a detective. And he appears in the book that's due out shortly called Benediction.
Right.
And then he appears in a third novel that'll be out again in this summer. So there's that first-person narrator, and then there's another set of characters that are they're third-person characters that are different from him. But it's the same town and the same general situation. So.
Right. Same Rosette.
Yeah, Rosette, Montana.
Yeah, which is obviously Missoula. I mean, it can't be anywhere else.
Well, maybe vaguely it may be reminiscent of Missoula.
It's very reminiscent of Missoula.
Yeah,
that makes it real meaningful to a local reader.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. I wanted to have. I didn't want to base it on a real town, mostly because this is where I work and everything, and I didn't want people to confuse the fiction with the reality. So.
Right. Yeah. Sure. Is that a problem, since this is a small town and you probably know lots of people and lots of people have read your book? So.
No, it turns out that it hasn't been, I don't think, which I'm glad of. When I started to work at the police department, no one knew that I had this other secret life, you know. And when my first novel came out. Everyone said, "Oh wait, don't say anything around him. You'll see it in a book sometime." And then once people got used to that, now it's a relief. They come up and say, "I got a story here you should use. This is a good story." So it's like crossing a bridge, I think.
I guess we've sort of covered this already. The character Leo Banks is not a particularly admirable person in some ways. I mean, he's kind of a seedy person, but must be rather a composite of people you've known, or an invention entirely?
He's pretty much an invention, and he's I don't know. He's just the kind of character that came to me and seemed like the sort of guy who could find out the things that I wanted to find out in the books, you know, and somebody who could carry a story and has some edges that I hope are interesting too. So
He does. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. I want to ask you a little bit about, you know, obviously you have a demanding kind of a job, and how do you balance that with the writing? It must be difficult to find the time to do that.
Well, it's a benefit to me to a great degree that we work rather than 5 8-hour days, we work 4 10-hour days. So I always have a 3-day weekend, and then in the evenings too. And so it's just it's an adjustment that I've made over the years, and it's just a part of the way I work now. So it's not a conscious sort of thing anymore.
When did your first novel appear?
The first novel that I published, came out in 1982. It was called Max Holly,
Right.
and it's not a police novel; it's a hippie novel. And that was written, actually completed before I went to work at the police department. So,
I see.
yeah.
So did you have any prior experience with the whole world of publishing, or how to get published or anything before you took off on that venture?
No. I went through the MFA program here, and so I had friends that write and everything, of course. But this has been long enough ago that there weren't that many people in town who were publishing a lot, and so it was still kind of new territory. And it all just came down to send it out and send it out and send it out and keep doing it. So kind of learned the hard way. Yeah.
And what about the fact that Missoula seems to be a hotbed of published authors now? Do you think that's good for a writer, or is there mutual support, or is there competition, or how does that affect you?
One of the nice things about it here is that none of us seem to be particularly competitive with each other. I'm not sure why that is. I think one of the reasons is probably that there aren't a lot of publishers here, and so everything that we do is for consumption someplace else, or a lot of it. So that's nice. And it's nice to have people that do what you do. I can't imagine being the only writer that lives in a town. It would be pretty lonely.
Well, maybe you could tell us a little about your new book that's coming out shortly, Benediction, since we haven't had a chance to see it.
Well, let's see. Leo Banks, as we said, is the protagonist, and he's a detective. The book centers around his investigation of a rape that occurs in this town. And it's a kind of a bizarre sort of thing that happens to this woman. And Banks gets very involved in that investigation, not romantically involved with the woman, but very concerned, wanting to find out what happened. And then, as always happens, some things go wrong. So that's pretty much what that's about.
And what about when a new book comes out? Do you have any role in the promotion, or do the publishers take care of that, or how does that?
Well, so far I haven't done any of that. It's like sending your child forth into the world and hoping he or she does okay. I've never been sent on a tour or anything like that. So it would be fun to do someday, but so far I haven't ever done that.
You're going to do some local book signing, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think down at Barbara's at Fact and Fiction, we've discussed that, and so far that's all that's in the plans. I'm real reticent about things like that, so.
Oh, I see. Well,
yeah.
I wonder if I could just ask you a little bit more about the whole idea of the things that you write about in relationship to the work that you do. I mean, some of the characters are pretty cynical about, at least in Cupid, and I haven't read your other books, are pretty cynical about, well, about crime, about life in general, I think. Is that part of being a policeman, do you think? Is there a cynicism that builds up there?
There is, on one level, and on another level, it's not there. It's, most of us have a kind of a studied cynicism. It's almost, it's like a professional stance. And it's a way to distance yourself from what's going on. When the first police novel, Big Sky Blues, came out, Nori Coble down at Great Northern Books was talking to me about it later on, and she got this kind of worried look on her face and said, "Are all of the policemen in Missoula that cynical? Like, should I be worried about this?" And that's not the case. And it's as I said, as much a professional stance as anything else. I think a lot of professional people acquire that. Probably some of the reasons for the coarseness of that is because that's a reflection of the coarseness of the world we deal with a lot of the time. So.
Yeah, it seemed like to me we're just trying to describe that, not trying to make some sort of statement about it necessarily.
Oh no, that's yeah. My grandfather was talking to me about one of the books once, and he said he's a real good Methodist. You know, he said a lot of bad words in that book. And I said, well, yeah, that's kind of the world that I work in. So.
Right. What about writing? How did you come to be a writer? I mean, how did this genesis take place in you? I don't necessarily, and I think probably most people don't necessarily associate policemen and writers, although there is Joseph Wambaugh, I guess. But
well, the writing part of it came first.
Okay.
I wanted to write since I was in the 8th grade, and tried off and on, and never could figure out how to do it or make anything work. And it was always sort of a thing that cooked along in the back of your mind, you know. And one day in, oh gosh, about 1974, a friend of mine and I were talking about that, and he said, well, why don't you do that? So that was when I got serious about it, and ended up coming out here to school. Just came cold turkey and said, here I am, can I get in? And they said, no, you can't. And then it eventually did, you know, which was just my good fortune. And most foolish things like that don't work out. Then the police part of it came just because I wanted to stay in Missoula afterwards and needed a job. And was able to get this job at the police department. So it worked out nice that I've had a livelihood and a subject out of all that too. So that's just good luck.
And are there some particular writers, specifically in this genre of detective fiction, that you admire?
Oh, all the standards. The first time I ever thought of writing any kind of a crime book was after I'd read some Raymond Chandler. You know, I thought that looks like fun. And of course, Dashiell Hammett, Ross MacDonald, I always liked. A writer who's not so well known, Charles Willeford from Florida, is very good. Elmore Leonard, you know, all the big time guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, how does one go about breaking into that group? I mean, I want to know if you're, say, your editors, or how you work with your editors, or what they tell you when you send them a manuscript.
Well, if you're very lucky, they tell you if they'll buy it.
Yeah. And they obviously have told you that.
Yeah, but they say a lot of times that they won't buy it either, so you get kicked around some. I've got an agent in New York that I acquired just through sending out queries to people that advertise in Writer's Market. I sat down one day when I had a manuscript ready, and when my first novel came out, within a year after that, the publisher was sold, my editor was fired, and agent at the time disappeared from the face of the earth, so I had to start over. So I had this manuscript ready, and I went to all my friends and sent it around to all their agents and tried all that stuff, and they all said thanks but no thanks. And so then I turned to the writer's market and started flooding the mails with these queries and ended up with an agent that way. And that took about a year to do that. Then once he took it on, it took about another year to get it sold.
Wow. So during that time, were you working on something else, or were you just kind of waiting around to see what happened?
No, I started in on something else. I think you can dig yourself a hole rewriting these and worrying about it to satisfy a rejection letter. And so I always just took the attitude of once it's gone, it's gone, and you just put it out of your mind and let somebody else worry. You pay them money to worry about that, and started on something else. So. Okay. Yeah.
Well, now this is your fourth book coming out.
Yeah, the one that'll be out shortly.
When can we look for that? How soon can?
Well, it's Monday, maybe Tuesday.
Good.
Just any time now. I heard from a friend on the West Coast it's available there, so it should be in town shortly.
Good, and that's great.
Yeah.
I just had another question about about Missoula in particular, and I know we talked about this a little bit.
Okay.
I obviously, when I read your book, things clicked in my mind, like a description of the river or the canyon or something. Does it help to be grounded in a particular place? I mean, I know you said this is not necessarily Missoula; it's just a city in Montana. But does it help you to have that sort of?
I think it does, especially if you're outside of a large urban area. You can write about Los Angeles, and I suppose this, and most people in the country have some picture of L.A., and the same for New York or Washington, D.C. But if you're in a smaller town like this, unless you pin it down and really tie yourself to it, I think it might be easy to lose your sense of where you are and why you're there and what that means. So,
do you think it might have any detrimental effect on nationwide readership of a book, or not? Or does that
having it in a small town? And
if people can't identify with that small town.
Well, I've had some cynical thoughts about that too. When I've been in the midst of rejections, and I thought, you change the street names in this and make it L.A. and all of a sudden, there's a market there. So I guess the bottom line answer is I don't know. But I'm sure that people that write about smaller places suspect that once in a while. So.
And it doesn't seem to be a handicap at all that you live here instead of New York City. I guess. That can't always have been true. What's changed about, or has it always been true? People been able to live anywhere and write and get published. I don't know.
I don't know. I think it's helpful now that there's enough stuff being written in and about Montana and the Northwest in general that when you send something off to New York, I don't think it's seen quite so much as coming from the end of the earth as it might have been the case 10 or 15 years ago. I've known people who have lived in New York and have moved here that are convinced that you gain more than you lose by getting out of that rat race. So I take that on faith.
Okay. And if we could just for a minute go back to the whole idea of how your work helps your writing. It's the forensic investigation and all that kind of evidence. I mean, are you involved in that in your work? Or?
Yeah, it's a real nice part about or at least for my purposes, sometimes it seems like drudgery because you have to do it. But in a police department of this size, the officers themselves have to do a lot of the technical things. You know, you watch a cop show in New York, and the detective stands around with his hands in his pocket while the photographer comes in and takes the pictures, and the prints guy comes in and does the prints, and the blood guy comes in and does the blood, and then he goes to coffee or have drinks or to talk to the suspect or whatever. But we have to do all those things ourselves here, so when it comes then to time to write about that, it's nice to have that technical experience right there close at hand.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's been real helpful, I think. Plus, it's kind of fun work to do too.
But I mean, the details seem to be, from an obviously layperson's point of view, pretty realistic in the novel that I read.
Oh, well, thanks.
And you know, I figure, well, that must be because.
Yeah, because we've all done those things, and that's just what we do every day. You know, is that kind of technical work sometimes.
In
So.
Missoula, though, you don't deal with murder every day, I hope.
No.
In fact, it's pretty rare, I would guess.
Yeah, I think we have, in the city and county combined, probably between 3 and 6 homicides a year. So.
But people love to read about it. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
why is that, do you think, as a mystery writer? I'm going to ask you that. Why do people love to read about that?
I don't know. There's a little quotation at the beginning of one of William Kennedy's Albany, New York novels. It's from Eugenie Ionesco. It says, "Society loves a killer. If we have any feelings at all for the victims, it's gratitude for allowing themselves to be killed." And I showed that to my boss at the police department once, and he thought that was the most depressing thing he'd ever read. But it seems to be true, and I don't know why that is. It seems to be just a fascination with aberrant behavior, you know. So.
And of course, there is a good story often, and there's a sense of closure that
Sure. Yeah.
a lot of things don't give us nowadays.
Yeah. There are beginnings, middles, and ends, and reasons why these things happen, and
in the books, anyway, but maybe not always in your work. Huh?
No, not all the time. Yeah, sometimes things just don't make sense, or you can look at them so long and closely that they'll make sense, and then you go beyond that where they start to fragment again. So that can occur too.
Okay. Yeah. Your new book again will be coming out anytime, and it's called Benediction.
Yes.
Guest today has been Bob Reed, who is a detective here in Missoula and also an author. Thanks a lot for being our guest on our cover. I'd like to take a few minutes here to talk about some things that are happening at the library. I guess I do this on every program, but I'm going to keep doing it for a while. Last February, we did reinstate some hours that we had previously had to give up because of budget cuts. We're now open 6 days a week. We're open Mondays. Monday through Thursday, we're open from 10 in the morning till 9 in the evening, and Friday and Saturday, 10 until 6. So be sure and take note of that we are open Mondays again. A lot of people, I think, still don't realize that. Coming up starting on February 4th, we'll be reinstituting a new series of preschool story times for kids ages 3 to 5. And we do 3 of those a week, one on Tuesdays at 7 in the evening, one on Thursdays at 1:30 in the afternoon, and one on Fridays at 10:30 in the morning, so that you can take your pick, whichever fits in more conveniently with your schedule. And we think it's really important for kids to be exposed to books and reading at a very early age, and so we encourage people to make some time to bring their preschoolers down to the library for that program. Also want to put in a plug for our special Book Babies program. That's for parents and toddlers age birth to 24 months, and that happens on the first Wednesday of each month at 7 o'clock at the library. We do some simple little stories and games for the kids, and we do a special program for the parents also. So keep that in mind. That's the first Wednesday. Another thing I want to plug just a bit tonight, in the few minutes we have left, is a special program that we're going to be doing in cooperation with the Missoula Museum of the Arts. And that's from January 17th until March 15th. There'll be a special art exhibit of children's picture book art down at the museum. You can call them down there for more information about the times that you can go see that. But the library is cooperating in a number of ways, including being involved with all the 5th graders in Missoula and doing a special program for them at the library. And finally, I want to make a special mention tonight of the Library Foundation, which is a fairly newly established organization. And the Library Foundation has a goal of building up an endowment to be used for special projects, special library sorts of projects, furniture, equipment, anything else that we need that isn't part of our regular budget process. So if you know people who might be interested in hearing more about the foundation or about giving, please ask them to give me a call down at the library. Our number is 721-2665, and my name's Dave Pauley. I'm the director, and I can give anybody who wants some more information about the Missoula Public Library Foundation. I'd like to thank all the people who helped put this program together, since I have a little bit of time here. Karen Reard never gets in front of the camera. She's always behind, but she's the children and young adults librarian at the Missoula Public Library and has been real helpful with this. And also Randy Ammon, who's the director here at MCAT, and his wife Betty Ammon, who also works for us down at the library and is the producer of this show. And finally, Barbara Thoreau, who I think must know every writer in Missoula and is able to talk them into coming on the show. We're a low-budget operation. We don't give anybody any money for doing this, but we really have had some great guests, including our guest tonight. Thanks again, Bob, for being our guest.
Yep, you're welcome.
We look forward to your novel coming out soon.
Thank you.
Okay. to Undercover. I'm Dave Pauley, Director of the Missoula Public Library, and this is the show that looks between the covers of books by Missoula area authors. Our show is jointly sponsored by the Missoula Public Library and by Fact and Fiction Bookstore. And our guest tonight is David Cates. Welcome, David. Thanks for being our guest. And he is the author of a new novel called Hunger in America. And this is your first novel, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Yes, and I wonder if we could just talk a little bit about how this novel came about, or how you got into writing.
Well, I studied journalism as an undergrad at the University of Montana, and I was learning how to write in journalism school, learning how to write sentences, because I didn't know how to write sentences, and they taught me how. But as I began to write news stories, and also began to read fiction, I just realized that's what I wanted to do. And so as soon as I graduated from college in '79, I started to write fiction. I said, that's what I'm going to do. So that's just what I did.
And what predates the novel, or what format? Short stories? Or?
Yeah, I wrote stories for about. Well, I've been writing stories all the way through since then, but until probably the last year, I haven't worked on any stories. But I wrote just stories for about 3 years, from like '79 to '82, and then I started this novel in '82 and finished a draft in '85. In which, during those 3 years, I was just primarily working on the novel, and then I couldn't sell it, and I did revisions every now and then. But over the next number of years, I was working on stories and rewriting this, and working on stories and rewriting this, and so it's a long story. But it finally finishes with I sold it in '90, almost 2 years ago. So from the process of starting it to the time that I sold it was 8 years, and then I did another rewrite after it sold. Minor stuff, but I thought it was important, the last stuff I did.
Now, was that rewrite based on some advice from editors, or how did that?
Yeah, I had a
work?
good editor who. What he did is he asked me questions about the book, and the book takes place all in one night, and there's a lot of little details, and the arrangement of details is small work. I didn't spend many days from the time I sold it to the time the last draft was done. I maybe spent 6 weeks, 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks at another time. But the work was was precision work. It was arranging details so that the revelation would be more dramatic, would make more sense in the story. So.
And as you said, it takes place all in one night, and it's set in Kodiak, Alaska, which probably for most of the people who are going to read this is not a place they know very much about. And why did you choose to set it there? Does that place have something special, mean something to you?
Well, I suppose it does, but I would never want to say that I know a lot about Kodiak, Alaska. I know enough to write this book, but I didn't try to write a book about Kodiak. I worked there in 1976 loading bush planes and working in a cannery. And then I went back again in 1983 after I was working on this. I'd probably spent a year on this already, and I went back and I drove a cab, and I worked on a fishing boat. And the first time I went there in '76, I was 20 years old, and it kind of, well, I always say it knocked me on my rear end, because was my response afterward. It took me months, years. I was still trying to figure out what happened to me up there, what it was about that place that really kind of floored me, changed the way I looked at the world. Part of that also was during that 6 months period, I was in Alaska for 3 months. I went back to Wisconsin, and then I left and I went to Africa for 3 months. And when I was in Africa, I started reading novels, and those were two experiences: the Kodiak experience, then the Africa thing, plus reading. I'd never read novels before. I wasn't the same person after that time. I mean, it was, and as I wrote, there was something about Kodiak that stuck in my imagination. I mean, it's very, you know, it lends itself to drama in the sense that it's this island, and the way at least I was interpreting the universe anyway. It was all there. It was this ocean, it was these mountains, there's this little strip of land where these people lived on. It lent itself to allegory really well, and so I just stuck with it. I didn't see any reason to move my novel somewhere else or to invent a fictional place.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting to hear you say that you drove a cab while you were there, because your protagonist, Jack Dempsey Cliff, is also a cab driver. And again, it was a little incongruous to me. I mean, I think of cab drivers in Chicago or New York City, but I don't think of them in Alaska. But that was his profession while he was there.
I love the idea of writing an urban Alaska book. I mean, it was kind of like my experience in Alaska, which hasn't been that broad. I've worked up there for 3 times for 2 months, twice in Kodiak, once up in Fairbanks. And my experience with the state has been really a relatively urban experience. I've never lived in the villages, and most of the people who live in Alaska, a vast percentage of them, live in the cities. They don't live in the villages. And so that although it has this reputation of being this wild state, it is wild in the sense it's not paved. There's the experience of being there is not that different than being in Chicago or being in Missoula, in cities.
Right.
So,
well, your main character, Jack Cliff, has gone there for reasons that reveal themselves a little slowly as you go through the book. But mainly, he's kind of searching for a father who went there. And I guess maybe he's searching for something else. What do you see him as searching for when he's
the meaning of life?
Yeah.
You know, that's ultimately what he's doing. I think he's searching for his father, but he's also trying to figure out if it's possible for him to be happy, if he ever has been happy, what happiness is, what love is. Why we don't feel good all the time when we think we should. So it's a big search, you know, in a skinny book, and I think that searching for a father is a old. It's an old story. Even those of us who knew our fathers, we still wonder. We want to know. We want to know them better. We never know exactly who they are, and so he doesn't ever learn that much about his dad during the course of the book.
Little pieces here and there.
Yeah, because ultimately I think the story of any of our lives is living with the mystery of not knowing, and how do we live with that? How do we make sense of partial knowledge? And that's a lot what's going on with Jack, I think, in this book.
And what about some of the other people? One thing I noticed is that they had not only a name, but they had a place attached to their name, like the waitress from Moscow, Idaho, and somebody else from Great Falls. And
yeah, there's Londa Evans from Little Rock, Arkansas,
right.
Johnny Johnson from Billings, Montana.
Right.
Yeah, well, I did that because that's another thing that you see in Alaska, but I also think you see it all over this country. We live in a transient. The whole history of this country has been transience, and so, what's your name and where are you from? Those are the questions. That's the way we define ourselves often, especially in a new place. So I just lay those on as tags on the characters, partially because it was practical. I mean, there's a lot of characters in this book, and I have to keep reminding the reader who these people are, and partly because these are, in some sense, the most important attributes to to their personalities.
Mhm.
So,
And they may have been there searching for something too. I had the feeling that there was some common thread running through everybody's reasons for coming to
mhm.
Kodiak.
Yeah, it's well. I thought. See, it's not very subtle. Kodiak wasn't a subtle place, and I hope now, as a older person, I can set a novel in a less subtle, in more of a subtle place. But Kodiak is not subtle, and I didn't. It was very dramatic. People came and go there for a reason, which isn't necessarily the truth, but they're exposed. They go up there. They're a long way from home. They don't know. They don't know what's going to happen. They have their hearts on their sleeves, or if not their hearts, their glands on their sleeves, and they are up there for. They're very exposed. They're away from everything that would have protected them before. So, this is a book about restlessness and searching, which I think is the American experience. I mean, this whole. If you read about the West or the Midwest or New York, it just depends on how far back you go, and you look at census figures for little towns. Little town in in New York. I remember my wife was reading during the decade of 1860 to 1870. Only like 20% of the people that were there at the beginning of the decade were there at the end of the decade. This whole country has been made up of transient population, and so it's very visible in Alaska now.
It seemed like there was Jack. Originally came there from Wisconsin. It seemed like the contrast kept, as his memories of Wisconsin would flash onto his mind, that there was a contrast there. I kept thinking that, in fact, you even referred to at one point, you said that the farm he came from was almost like a womb to him, and that somehow the contrast of that safety and security compared to what was there in Alaska was pretty startling to me.
Yeah, I think that's part of that may be part of the restlessness that is going to drive the guy who's born in Alaska somewhere else, if he's American. And I don't know why that is, but my great-grandfather lived in the ocean, and he was a seaman off the coast of Maine, and my grandfather was born in Maine, and he moved to New York, and my father was born in New York, and he moved to Wisconsin, and I live in Montana. And that is a common American story. And I don't know why we have that in us, but it seems to be there. And so
Yeah.
I don't know what it means any more than anybody else, but that's a lot of the characters in here have that same.
There were two characters who never appeared as actual people in the book outside of what other people thought about them. And one was Jack's father, of course, who died before Jack even got up there. And the other one was Mary, his girlfriend, back in Wisconsin. But it seemed to me like they were real vivid people because they were alive in the memories of well, especially Mary, but Jack's father too. He was alive in the memories of the other people. Was that an intentional thing to create them wholly out of other people's memories?
Well, part of what this book. How many times have I said what this book is about during this conversation? I don't know, but part of what it is about is the way that we are kind of we are prisoners of the moment. We're prisoners of the here and now and the little space we're sitting but the way that we the way the way we keep that from being unbearable is memory and imagination, and our minds are full of ghosts. At the very beginning of this, I think I say Kodiak is an island of 10,000 gray shades. I mean ghosts there as much as anything else. That this is what we live with. This is what keeps us sane. Our memories of people who aren't around us often, especially if we're a long way away from home.
And,
So
and Jack not only has these memories, but he also has this facility for imagining a future with somebody, maybe even a complete stranger on an airplane sometimes.
Mhm.
And I found that pretty interesting. An elaborate future once in a while.
yeah, I know Jack is kind of a spacey guy. I think sometimes he does have an imagination.
Yeah.
That's the only way that I think that you can write a book that 2/3 of which takes place inside of a taxi cab.
Mm-hmm.
Is the guy better have an imagination. He better be interesting, otherwise, well, I would get pretty bored writing it.
Yeah.
I mean, then the door closed.
What about? I guess I was thinking about hunger. The title "Hunger in America," and there is actual physical hunger described here. Jack keeps wanting to eat, and then he gets another call to go out and pick somebody else up, and then these two guys eat his food at one point that he has sitting in the taxi while he's out doing something else. And so there is actual description of physical hunger, but it's more than just a. I mean, that's obviously some kind of a metaphor. I was struggling a little bit with that to figure out what that was. What do you think that
Well,
was?
I saw it. I see the primary metaphor is spiritual hunger. I think these people, we all are looking for what our life means. What is our life about? That's the question every human being asks himself. A dog doesn't ask himself that, right? But a person does. Why am I here? Why do I go to work? Why do I wake up? And that's these people who are, for the most part, a long way away from their easy answers to those questions. And so those questions weigh more heavily on them than we may be able to skate through days without thinking about it very much.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the circumstances these characters are in, that question weighs a little bit more heavily on them. But the title partly comes from I was kind of very into the book and what was going on in it, and in the early 80s, and I remember seeing this or hearing this report about Robert McNamara's report on hunger in America. It was a what's the word? It was a documentation of actual hunger in America, and I remember thinking that I just had this kind of anger, and I think oftentimes books and stories come from anger or some strong feeling like that, which you don't know what else to do with, so you write a book. Right? Mm-hmm. I remember thinking we are so, as a culture, so obsessed with numerically documenting things, mm-hmm. and that we don't even see. That's what I was thinking at the time. We don't even see how it is we are really hungry. How is it the Americans are really hungry? How is it that where's the real hunger? And so I started to see that that's what I was writing about. And so I thought, name it that. Mm-hmm. That's what it's about.
Mm-hmm. So it's a spiritual quest and a spiritual hunger.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
But anybody can say that, I think there's a lot of different hungers in there, and whichever one. I mean, ultimately the reader figures out what it's about. Uh-huh. But my idea was as much spirituality as anything else, and I don't know the answers that way any more than anybody else does, but I can see a certain vacuum when I.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about? I wanted to ask you a little bit about Jack's father, who was a boxer named Kid Cliff, and who was a veteran who had evidently survived the Bataan Death March in the Philippines during the war. He came back from the war and was only in his farm for a short time, and then left for Kodiak. And I was trying to understand that guy, I guess just the way Jack was, by the bits and pieces that I got. And, did you know anything about did you create that Bataan Death March background for him based on some of your own reading about it, or was that of interest to you?
Well, you know, sometimes when you write, you just phrases. You just write phrases. You know, so and so. You know, you don't necessarily plan it, and so I tagged Kid Cliff with that past, with the past of being a prisoner of war. I didn't know very much about Bataan at all, and I just tagged that in a first draft of some reference to him. Mm-hmm. But the way it works usually, with me anyway, in writing is, then I look at, you know, you look back and you go, which one, some of these details, some of these things you write on a draft are actually intriguing. And you say, yeah, that's right, that's what he was. He was a Japanese prisoner. That explains something to me. And then I started doing some reading. And I read a lot of accounts of these guys and what they went through. Mm-hmm. So it kind of started out as just a side comment, and then I did a little bit of research as far as what actual prisoners had to endure, and what it and how, and then I tried to imagine what it would make a person, mm-hmm. what it would make this guy feel like, and because, you know, I'm not a sociologist, I don't know what it makes a person, but I can say what it does to my character.
Yeah, you know, it was very believable, I thought. I just wondered why this novel almost seems to me like you wrote it with the classical unities in mind, almost, you know, like the action taking place over just a short, maybe 24-hour or less period, and that was obviously intentional. Was that, what's the reason for that technique?
I don't know what the reason is. You know, you once again, I write scenes, and in the scenes the characters begin to develop themselves. And after a few years, I began to realize that this was all one night. Mm-hmm. I didn't start out thinking that. I started out trying to understand these kind of mysterious characters, which to me were intriguing.
So the characters came, I mean, the setting and everything else is incidental to what development of the characters.
Yes, with me it's always, you know, it's a dialogue. It's a room with people talking. It's somebody lying to somebody else, and I don't know why, and I don't know where, and I don't know how it fits into any big story, and that's what I did for a few years actually before. Well, I think actually once I went back to Kodiak and I started to drive a cab, and I'd been working on the book for about a year, I began to see that cab as a great kind of vehicle for all these characters that I'd been inventing. And so it kind of was serendipitous. Also, the whole Jack Dempsey thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't plan that Jack Dempsey was going to die on May 31st, 1983, but he did. And suddenly I thought, that's what my character's name is. I didn't even know that was my character's name until I heard that Jack Dempsey died. So
I need to ask you a question I ask fairly often, and that is, how do you respond to reviews? Have you read many reviews in any of the literature?
Well, the very first review I got was from Kirkus. It's the Kirkus Review and Publishers Weekly come out before the book is published. And
right.
So I get this letter from my publisher in the mail, just an envelope, and I open it up, and it's a Kirkus review, a copy of the Kirkus Review, and it was horrible. It was just horrible. It was like, I just read it, and I felt like, well, I felt sick to my stomach. I thought, I felt like I'd just kind of like done this tap dance with a tutu on in front of some people, and then they didn't clap, you know, they just, they sneered, and then I felt just, it was horrible. I just threw it away, but then about 3 days later I got a really wonderful review from Publishers Weekly. Yeah. And then I thought, oh, that's how this works. Yeah. Some guys hate it, some guys don't.
I guess
and
so.
then since then it's been more, I've had this more of a feeling like if I read a review that's positive, I think, sometimes it's real interesting to see what the person sees in the book.
Yeah.
And working on a book as long as I did, there hasn't been anything written that I haven't thought about already.
Wow.
That I haven't, I saw that, I thought about that. So far, there hasn't been a lot written about it, so it's been real pleasing. There's been a lot of good reviews since.
There have been. Yeah. Great. Well, I want to thank you for being our guest. The name of the book again is Hunger in America, and the author is David Cates. And thanks again for sharing your thoughts about your book. I want to take a couple of minutes to run down a few things about the library. We'll be starting up, we've had a real successful summer, and we'll be starting up our fall programs in late September for preschoolers, so keep in touch with us about that. I want to make a plug for our book discussion group. As I was reading this book, it seemed to me this would be a great one for our discussion group. We have a book discussion group that meets once a month at the library, the third Thursday, and you can call us at 721-2665 if you might be interested in joining that group. We have room for some more people, and we'd like to have a few more people involved in that. Again, want to remind people that our hours are 60 hours a week. We're open Monday through Saturday, all year round, and 4 evenings and every Saturday. And just to finish up my little promo tonight, I did want to mention also our Book Babies program, which is a special program we have for parents and toddlers once a month on the first Wednesday of the month. And finally, I want to finish up my library plugs tonight with some statistics, if I may, very briefly. I just want to let people know that during the past year, we count our year from July 1st to June 30th, and we just compiled all the statistics for that year. And we checked out 490,582 items during the year, which is an all-time record for the Missoula Public Library. We've been really busy, and I want to thank the community for all the support we've gotten. And one way to think about that, if you want to think about it in that way, is if you had to go out and buy 490,000 items, books, videos, tapes, magazines, all the things that we deal with every day, at an approximate cost of $20 a shot, you'd be paying over $9 million, almost $10 million for that kind of material. And we're offering that service for less than $600,000 of your tax money. So we think it's a pretty good deal. I want to thank all the people who helped make this show possible, people behind the camera, Karen Reard and Cal DeBryan and Betty Ammon, who's our producer, and especially Barbara Thoreau from Fact and Fiction Bookstore, who finds us these wonderful authors. And thanks for being with us tonight, and again, thanks, David Cates.
Oh, you're welcome.